Harper Audio presents Your Government Failed You by Richard A. Clarke. Read by the author. Copyright 2008 by Richard A. Clarke. Production and abridgment copyright 2008 by HarperCollins Publishers.
Chapter 1. 9/11 changed everything? When I said, "Your government failed you," to the families of the victims of 9/11, it seemed to me that I was merely stating the obvious. The government had failed the American people, and I had. 3,000 people had been murdered in a morning, not on a battlefield, not in their battleships, as had happened at Pearl Harbor, but in their offices. They had been killed by a terrorist group that had promised to attack us, and which we had been unable to stop. The CIA had been unable to assassinate its leadership. The CIA had been unable to tell anyone when the terrorists had shown up in this country, even though CIA knew they were here. The national leadership had been unwilling to focus on the threat for months, although repeatedly warned to do so. And I had been unable to get either the bureaucracy or the new national leadership to act toward the terrorist group before the big attack, to act in the way that they would want to respond after thousands of Americans had been murdered. The American people had a right to know what the failures were that led to 9/11 and why they occurred. I tried to tell that story as I saw it, stretching over more than 2 decades, in Against All Enemies, a book I wrote 2 years after the attack. Then the 9/11 Commission was forced into existence by the victims' families. Its report and staff studies looked at what had happened from a number of perspectives and uncovered new information. Since then, several authors and analysts have added further detail. On that horrific day in September, while trying to make the machinery of government work in the minutes and hours after the attack, I suppressed my anger at Al-Qaeda, at the U.S. government, and at myself. There was an urgent job to be done that day, but in a brief moment of catching my breath, I was consoled by my colleague Roger Cressy, who noted that finally now all of our plans to destroy Al-Qaeda and its network of organizations would be implemented. The nation would deal seriously and competently with the problem. I assumed he was right and got back to work. It turned out he was wrong. 9/11 changed everything. That was the remark we heard over and over again in the years that followed. It was only partially true. 9/11 did not change the Constitution, although some have acted as if it did. Nor did the government's response to the attacks make us more secure. Although a great deal of activity has taken place, Al-Qaeda the organization and Al-Qaeda the movement still threaten the United States. We still have significant vulnerabilities here at home, and abroad we have far fewer friends and far more enemies than we did on 9/12. By the second anniversary of the attack on America, the United States had invaded and occupied 2 Islamic nations, created an Orwellian-sounding new bureaucracy, launched a spending spree of unprecedented proportions, and was systematically shredding international law and our own Constitution. Despite our frenzy, or in many cases because of it, the problem we sought to address, violent Islamist extremism, was getting worse. Much of what our government did after 9/11, at home and abroad, departed from our values and identity as a nation. It was also massively counterproductive. Our government failed us before and after 9/11, and it continues to do so today. Indeed, as this book unfolds, you will see how I believe that we have been failing at important national security missions for a long time. Sometimes, as perhaps proved by the end of the Cold War, we succeed despite ourselves, like a student who makes it even by failing some grades and incompletes. But the failure
Sample complete. Ready to continue?